Hello guys, my name is Anita Pertiwi. I am an English literature student of Online University, and in this video I will presentation about analyze the issues reflected in the Zoo story by Edward Albee. But first, have you ever read the Zoo story? Here is a few information about the Zoo story. The Zoo story, with original title Peter and Jerry, was written in 1958 by Edward Albee. Who is Edward Albee? Edward Albee is one of the Big Four classic American playwrights, including Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, and Arthur Miller. This story is about Peter, an upper-middle-class family man and publishing executive in his mid-40s, meet Jerry, the outcast, outsider, disreputable bad boy sort, on the park bench in Central Park. First, Peter doesn't want to talk to Jerry, but he gets stuck in any way, and the conversation between the two of them becomes long and end up tragically. The story is unique and so interesting because it's about universal experience of sitting in the park and having some weirdo come up to you, talk about the zoo, try to steal your bench, then kill himself. Well, actually, it's not a universal experience, but from the story, there are many issues that we can all relate to the reality, such as social class issues or failure of communication issues that makes all the tragedy happen. So, in the next slide, I will explain the kinds of issues that relate to the story. First is alienation. There is two alienation about the story that relate to the reality is first urban alienation. When the story was written in 1958, the urban lifestyle that is familiar to modern audience would have been a relatively new concept. The 1920s were the first decade in which more Americans lived in cities than in the rural areas. As American cities continued to grow, people began to find that large cities ironically offered a weaker sense of community than small towns did. The social context helps explain Jerry's deep sense of loneliness, although it can also be attributed to his eccentric personality. And the second is alienation from self. This theory is from Karl Marx. Karl Marx divided alienation into four, but the Zoo story is related to the alienation from self, because both of the characters of the Zoo story feel alienated from themselves. Someone can contribute to the world in terms of our works as a part of our spacious essence of what makes us human. Jerry's character feels alienated because he is not rich and he didn't have anything. He loses his sense of himself. Unlike Jerry, Peter loses his sense of himself because he is now a father. He have to make money, he have two daughters and wife, so for the rest of his life, he takes responsibility for his family. Next, issues reflected to the story about social class. Peter and Jerry have different life stories and social life. Peter is an educated man from the upper middle class. He works at a publishing house and gets a high salary and also has a family. Jerry, on the other hand, is poor because he doesn't have any job. His family is dead and he lives in a low-rent boarding house. This difference is not just a matter of how much money they have. but it also affects everything from their philosophical viewpoints to the way they perceive the world. And the next issue is about communication. The tragedy of the story begins due to the failure of communication between Peter and Jerry. They have a different perspective to understand the words and concepts. An example of this comes early in the play when Jerry asks Peter about his family. When Peter tells Jerry that he has two daughters, Peter assumes this communicates that he is married. However, Jerry does not make this assumption, and Peter is confused when Jerry continues to ask him about his family. Because they come from such different socio-economic backgrounds, they do not approach issues with the same definitions, and hence is their ability to achieve any real intimacy hampered. Ultimately, the play's tragedy results from the inevitable fact that Cherry will never find a way to communicate with a world that considers him an outsider and refuses to try and see the world the way he does. And the last issues about absurdity. Another issue related to the story is an absurdity. According to philosophy, absurdism focuses on the tension between a meaningless universe and our constant striving to find meaning. This tension is what gives rise to the absurd. Camus argues that we are all immersed in this tension and thus faced with three alternatives. We can kill ourselves, we can deny absurdity and take refuge in the myths and religion, or we can embrace the absurdity. The story reflects how the world sometimes doesn't make sense. The story told by Jerry hints at this absurdity. He tells long and complicated stories that stops and start with no real relevance to anything Peter is saying. And the absurdity in the play peaks in the final moments. When Jerry stabs himself in the knife Peter is holding, the stabbing invites the audience to ask whether Jerry's death was murder or suicide, and to what extent Peter is responsible. So that's all I can say. I hope the information of the video can be useful. Thank you.